Hey everyone, Jewel Mayberry here with another cool astrology video. Today we're talking about Virgo Ascendant, so Virgo rising sign. So when you're born, there is a sign that is rising in the east at the moment of your birth, and that becomes your ascendant, your rising sign. It's the same thing. So when we're talking about Virgo Ascendant, we're talking about Mercury ruling the first house, because Mercury rules Virgo. The first house is about the self. It's about the physical body. It's about, it describes a lot about the health and the looks. And when Mercury rules the first house, it tends to make these people more wiry, muscular and thin, and smaller. Now, depending on what else is in the first house, that's going to change things. You know, if Jupiter is here, or Saturn is here, or even Mars is here, this is going to change things. So, you know, when we're talking about, you know, when I do these videos about rising signs, this is a very basic look. We're just talking about the ruler of each house. And, you know, where that ruler is and whatever planets are in that house, that's going to change things. So, you know, when we're learning astrology, you know, we have to learn block by block and bit by bit, or else we'll get so overwhelmed, we'll give up. So, you know, that's why I make these videos so we can learn one thing at a time. But you have to keep in mind that the entire chart needs to be taken into consideration. And so you have to look at everything, not just one thing. But we're learning about one thing at a time here. So the first house, you know, is the house of self. And Virgo rising tends to be very self-conscious. They tend to think a lot about themselves. And it tends to be more negative than positive. They're very, very self-conscious about their bodies. And they pay a lot of attention to how they look, how they present themselves. And they tend to keep themselves very fit, especially well into old age. They build muscle quickly and they lose it slowly. They tend to have a high metabolism and move rather furtively, rather quickly. And they are very careful about how they present themselves in public. You know, how they dress, how they, you know, the amount of makeup and how they wear it. This is all very well considered before they go out anywhere. Even if, you know, it's a very casual look for them, they have taken pains to make sure that, at least in their mind, they look good enough. So, you know, they're very, very self-conscious, very much about health, too. They tend to pay attention to health habits, health fads. There's a high degree of vegetarianism among Virgo risings, and they pay a lot of attention to what goes into their bodies and what their bodies look like. Their second house is ruled by Libra, and Libra is really about balance. And there was usually a lack of it in some way in the early upbringing of people with this rising sign. The second house really, you know, describes the voice and the throat and the neck and our early upbringing, our very early upbringing. The first, second, and third house and fourth house really, you know, describe our childhood. And there was a search somehow for balance with these people. You know, something was going on, depending on, you know, how Venus is placed and aspected. That will tell you what was going on. But, you know, there was something going on that, you know, the cause, you know, a lack of it. You know, maybe, you know, there was too much of something or a lack of something. And so, consequently, they tend to, as adults, feel that there was some kind of lack in their early home environment. And they tend to, their speech tends to be very kind, because, Venus is ruling their speech here, and they tend to, there's a, I want to say, there's a real push in them to respond in kind ways, and they will, not a lot of profanity is used by these people, and they, they're not necessarily, the best speakers. There's some of the best when it comes to rising signs, but they're really much about, pleasing speech. Their third house is ruled by, I have to get all my notes out here. We have Scorpio there, and the modern ruler of Scorpio is Pluto. The traditional ruler is Mars, so you have to look at both these planets when you're really talking about this rising sign in this house. So the third house is really, siblings, short distance travel, communication, and our courage is also found in the third house. Our efforts are found in the third house as well. And Pluto makes things very intense. So there's often a very intense relationship with the siblings. Now that can go either way. That can either be a good thing, where they're, a really, really good best friend, well into old age, or it can be, a very tumultuous relationship that's, intense in a negative way. So it really depends on, how Mars and Pluto are aspected and in what houses. That will give you the full picture there. But it's an intense relationship, and a deep relationship with the brothers and the sisters. When it comes to their courage, they tend to have a lot of it. They are a quieter sign, but they really can work behind the scenes to get what they want. They will go about it quietly. They, are kind of like, the tortoise and the hare when it comes to things of the third house. It may take them longer to get what they're going, but they have this stick-to-itiveness and this grit that is really astounding when it comes to having the long breath, when it comes to getting what they want. And they can be a bit vindictive, because we have Pluto ruling, the house of our efforts and our communication and our courage. And they can really hold on to slights and hurts and things that happen in the course of communication. They can really choose to not let these things go. So, if they, feel, that they have been verbally abused, or, someone has said something to them that, was really cutting, they can really hold on to those things and remember them for a long time, and they will hold it against people. The fourth house, we have Sagittarius, and this is a real interesting ruler to have here in the fourth house, because it shows that the home life was often, most likely, religious. And if it wasn't religious, it was very philosophical in its own way. a lot of times we find that the mother was the one that really pushed for, you know, the teaching of religious beliefs, or she was the one that wanted to instill the moral code in the Virgo rising person. And there could also have been a lot of travel in the home environment. You know, either, you know, there was, you know, extended vacations overseas, or it was a military family, or you know, there was just a lot of, you know, travel and movement, and if not that, then a lot of expansion in whatever way that was. You have to look to Jupiter to really give you the picture of how, you know, things of the fourth house went. And also this can point to, you know, where Jupiter is placed. This can show travel after marriage, because the eighth house is, you know, what we get after partnership. The seventh house is partnership. The eighth house is what we get after partnership. And Jupiter ruling the fourth house of home, being in the eighth house for Pisces or Virgo rising, can show that there's a lot of travel and expansion and philosophical ideas and movement after marriage. So, you know, the ruler of each of these houses that we're talking about, you know, has a lot to do with, you know, the full picture of what's going on. So you always keep that in mind. So, you know, Jupiter ruling this house shows that, you know, this was usually a religious family life that the Virgo rising came from. The fifth house is ruled by Capricorn, and this is kind of problematic for people with this rising sign, because Saturn is the planet that rules the fifth house for Virgo rising. And Saturn is really delay, and it's lessons, and it's karma, and it's things that are unpleasant, and it's structure and denial. And the fifth house is children, creativity, risk, gambling, romance, fun. These things are all of the fifth house. And when we have Saturn here, you know, structuring and teaching and shaking his finger, and he really provides delay. Things of the fifth house are very much restricted. So there tends to be less children in the families of people with Virgo rising, because this is the house of children, and Saturn is, you know, restriction. And whatever house Saturn rules or Saturn is in, he shrinks the things of that house. He restricts them, he makes them smaller. And women with this rising sign tend to have a harder time conceiving. It tends to, it's not always denied, but it can show delay. You know, it may take, you know, a couple more years to get pregnant than you anticipated, or, you know, depending on how Saturn is aspected, and if Saturn is with Mars or aspecting Mars, or if Mars is in the fifth house, you know, that can really exacerbate things and, you know, make, you know, things of having children a lot more difficult. But usually, you know, with Virgo rising, unless, you know, Saturn is, you know, very beautifully placed, there was some type of delay, or, you know, something to be learned along the way when it comes to having children. And the things of creativity tend to be stifled and tend to be delayed. Like, these people don't really find their creativity or their courage to become creative or really show what they're really made of until later in life. And the fifth house really shows, like, bachelor's level education, like college level education, and that can often be delayed for this rising sign. You know, maybe they don't finish their degree until their later 30s. Maybe they don't decide what it is they're meant for. That's very common with this rising sign. Until, you know, their 40s. And then they go back, you know, and get that degree that they need to, you know, enter into that trade or into that, that field that they, you know, have found their passion for. But, you know, finding that passion is usually not something that they do early on in life. The sixth house is ruled by Aquarius, and Saturn rules Aquarius, and the modern ruler is Uranus. And the sixth house is 12th from the 5th. So, you know, anything 12th from any other house shows the losses of that house. So, losses for Virgo rising tend to come through things of the 5th house. So, you know, the 6th house is diseases. It's daily work. It's the daily grind. It's health, enemies, small pets. So, you know, when we're talking, and our stress is really found in our 6th house. So, you know, being 12 from the 5th, our stress for Virgo rising tends to come through children. It tends to come through, you know, things of the 6th house, of the 5th house, sorry. You know, through, you know, the amount of energy that it takes to express ourselves creatively. The amount of energy it takes to take care of or deal with children. That is where we find our diseases come in and our stress comes in. You know, anything having to do with the 5th house. So, they can be, you know, they tend to be one of the more healthy rising signs. They tend to be one of the more resilient when it comes to their health. But that, you know, things of the 5th house is just, you know, something that they really have to watch out for, because it's more even of a, you know, they're not so much prone to, you know, like terminal catastrophic things. It's more things having to do with daily stress. The 7th house has Pisces there. And this is a little bit problematic because Pisces is ruled by Jupiter and co-ruled by Neptune. And Neptune is really the modern ruler. And whatever Neptune rules or the house he's in, he tends to weaken that house. And the mates of Virgo rising can often be they're infirm in some fashion. They either can have emotional problems, they can have a disability, they can be prone to addiction. They, you know, can, they're odd oftentimes in some fashion. They're different. And Jupiter being here really shows that they are often, you know, the spouse or the partner is often educated, an expansive thinker, a philosophical thinker, someone that, you know, will introduce travel into the life of, you know, this person with this rising sign. So, you know, with these two planets ruling the 7th house, we see a spouse that is often an oddball. And they tend to be a very esoteric thinker. They can be religious, but it is oftentimes in a very progressive way. They're not traditionally religious. They can be, have some very interesting ideas about the way, about spirituality. And they tend to be a very expansive thinker. The 8th house is ruled by Mars because we have Aries there. And Aries is really the warrior. And the 8th house is, our ups and downs, how we handle the difficulties of life. And Mars ruling this really makes these people able to adjust to just about anything. They can, be kicked down, but they will come back. And they tend to handle the stresses of life. They can handle, long-term stress and disappointment very well. They can keep going. And they tend to, be very much about, digging deep about the things of the 8th house. They're very much about, wanting to see what's behind the scenes. Because, Mars is very driven. And the 8th house is, things of the unseen. And Mars is, also the planet of sex and sexuality. And the 8th house is sex and sexuality. So they tend to have a very high sex drive. You wouldn't think it to look at them, Virgo rising, but they tend to be one of the signs that actually do have a higher sex drive. You usually hear, no, it's, Scorpio sun or, Cancer moon or whatever. But Virgo rising is actually, in that category of, somebody that has a naturally high sex drive just because of who rules their 8th house. Their 9th house is Taurus, and Venus rules that. And it's interesting to note how people with this rising sign usually grow up and adopt a different religion than the one that they were raised with. And it tends to be something progressive and a little bit even strange, something modern. And they are, Taurus is about, sticking with it and, being very stubborn. And these people are very much like that with their beliefs. Once they, adopt something, a belief, they really do tend to stick with it. They don't shift around a lot. They are about, growing up, redefining what it is they personally believe in, and then they tend to stick with that. And, Venus is also what we love. And 9th house is higher education, learning, philosophy. And so there is, a love of these things with Virgo rising. They often have, a lot of self-teaching. They're very much about, very self-taught. They could have, the equivalent of 3 PhDs, but have nothing on paper because they have read so much. And they tend to learn better on their own or online or, from books. A structured education they're good at it. They can do it. They actually, take tests well and, perform well in classroom environments, but they actually learn better on their own. 10th house is ruled by Mercury, or, well, by Mercury, because we have Gemini there. And they are very good at being one way with one person in public and another way with another person. So they actually make really good business people because they can shift back and forth pretty quickly between personalities, and they can be known for not being easy to know. Because, you know, the 10th house is the house of our reputation, the house of our career. It's really the reputation that precedes us. And Gemini is, you know, very much about being changeable and very much about being, you know, one way and at the same time being the other. So, you know, in their public life, they tend to be a bit of a chameleon. And with Mercury ruling this, they tend to be known as very intelligent and even logical. And they have a way with languages too. They can pick up languages faster than other signs. Mercury rules language. 10th house is really what we grow up to be from, you know, we grow up from our 4th house of roots up to our 10th house of career and of public life. And they just really pick up languages really easily, especially, and they can use them when it comes to career and jobs. We see, you know, translators of all kinds with Virgo rising. The 11th house is ruled by Cancer, and the moon is the planet here that rules this house. And the 11th house is really about our friends and about our social systems and our hopes and our dreams and our wishes, our wish fulfillment, and our incoming liquid gains are all 11th house things. And so the friends of people with this rising sign, they tend to be very near and dear to Virgo rising people because, you know, moon is, you know, our inner nurturer. And they want to really to nurture and care for their friends, and they, you know, will tend to not keep a lot. You have to look at the, you know, where the moon lies, because, you know, maybe the moon is an aspect to Jupiter, you know, in some configuration, and it's showing that, you know, they actually have a huge amount of friends. But traditionally, Virgo rising tends to keep a smaller circle of friends. And, you know, if Jupiter is in the 11th house, that actually shows, you know, a large social system too. So you have to look at everything. And moon is the mother. And the 11th house is the house of friendship. So we see that people with Virgo rising make a best friend out of their mother. It's very common for these people to grow up and become, you know, really bosom buddies with their own mother. And, you know, they'll pal around together, meet together, have lunch, gossip on the phone together, and really, really common. 12th house is ruled by the sun. And so the sun is our ego. It's our expression. It's our ego thrust, you know, what we put out there into the world, what we tend to show people about our personality. And when that comes into the 12th house of hidden things, often there is a search for who they are. You know, they'll have this, you know, emotional sense, but they're not really sure of who they are in the world. They can try on several different personas throughout their lives until, you know, they really find out, you know, who they are. And their ego tends to be very sensitive because, you know, 12th house is originally ruled by Pisces, and Pisces is deep sensitivity. And when the ego comes into the 12th house, it can be really, really tender. So, you know, I mean, they can just get decimated when it comes to their ego, where, you know, where other signs, they would just shrug that off and go on and not think too much about it. You know, Virgo rising can, you know, really be shook up about an encounter like that. And this is really the house of spirituality as well. Their ego tends to be tied up in their spirituality, and oftentimes they will want to be seen as a kind of, you know, a spiritual leader or someone that has, you know, information about things of the other realm, or because there's, you know, an ego satisfaction that comes from that kind of persona for them. And they tend to have a more gentle way about them because, you know, the actual, you know, personality, the expression is being ruled by, you know, by the 12th house. And the 12th house is a very, you know, deep and, you know, Piscean house. So they tend to, you know, come across as a more, you know, gentle type. So that was my analysis on Virgo rising personality, and stay tuned because Libra rising will be next, and I hope you enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And please remember to subscribe to my channel, and I will be back soon with another super cool video. Bye.